Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered. And I'm excited today because we're talking about one of our big topics we discuss in our PI training, but it's something that has day-to-day application and really can transform everything about you because we're dealing with the battle that's going on right here in our mind. And that's our topic and course is we love discussing. It's called the power of a transformed mind. It's one of my favorite topics. My wife loves teaching this as well. And today with me, I'm joined again with Ryan Harris. So he's jumping on to talk about his journey and then also what he's learned as he has watched his mind becoming new and is in process of that happening. So welcome, Ryan. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm excited.
So for you, what was your journey? So I know this is one of your topics that you're quite passionate about within our PI world and PI team. So what made you so passionate about it, and what were some, I think on everyone there's a couple of aha moments. Like for me, one of my favorite courses I just taught this last week is the New Testament themes, because it's all about your identity and dealing with that and what the New Testament says around those different topics. But for you, I think one of the big ones that you jumped into and the Lord really took you on a journey was this topic of, having your mind be made new. So what's that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, well, just for the record, I do love that topic, but I'm finding within PI, there's so many great. Obviously, that's kind of the point, right? There's so many great topics that point to different areas of who we are. But specifically, when I taught this one, I actually taught it first in Honduras. As I was preparing for that lesson, I realized that there was just so many things in my life that really this connected to. There was like I just like tethered topics to my past, my history. And so this topic specifically has kind of been the core healing journey for me in my spiritual life. I was talking to my father-in-law yesterday over a topic, and we were talking about just the journey of life and what it can do, what it can bring, how we adjust and adapt, and how we grow and become more like him. And I got this picture of me, because I didn't really understand the concept of mental health or even that transformational mind until later in life, and honestly probably mid to late 20s, where I really started to realize there were some things in my life that not only my mental capacity or my mental health was holding on to, but my heart. And so I began to invest in counseling, invest in these brain therapy, EMDR, all these things that you just don't really experience. I never talked about that in my childhood. And so as I began on that journey, I realized that the power of the transformed mind really is a journey, right? We never arrive to it. There's relapses, there's days that are just hard. And so as we start to go through this journey, I think it's just something that we just have to be attentive to daily. And that's what Paul talks about in his word in Romans 12, is just this concept of being transformed daily in our minds. And so it's connected to me in a deeper way. And I love teaching on it because I teach from a place of story and testimony, because I can share and be vulnerable within those places of mental health, having anxiety, having panic attacks, just my life kind of being on that path of learning how to heal from that has been encouraging. So that's why I love this topic so much. I love talking about it. I love being open about it. There's kind of a stigma about it, a generational stigma. I grew up in that generational stigma. And so finding freedom in this and being able to get it out there and talk about it's becoming obviously more and more popular today. But I'm very passionate about it and I love it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think is good in the world today, especially in the U.S. and specifically, is there is a much greater awareness of the importance of how you are mentally in your headspace. But what I love and one of the challenges that I think we have is you get to hear the world's view, and then you get to hear the kingdom view.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of overlap, but then there's not a lot of overlap as well. And that's one of the joys. Like, you referenced Romans 12. It's one of my favorite. When I preach on the will of God, I start with Romans 12, chapter 2, because it says, do not be like the images of the world. So if we're, seeking help, absolutely, let's go for it. But make sure it's seeking help on this side, so that overlap is happening and not just someone that has maybe some nice ideas, but uh, so don't be like the world, but be transformed by your mind becoming new. So, there's like coffee cup verse, we love
Sure,
this,
sure.
but there's a comma, so
Yeah,
that by testing you discover God's will for your life, what's good, perfect, and pleasing. And so the will of God's discovered by trying things, but it's a lot better to try things as your mind is made like his. So that's one of those things that I love is that, as our mind, because this is where most of the battle, like you were just saying, most of the battle in our life is
yep,
right here.
yep.
Uh, and what, a lot of times for me, my heart says yes when I hear a truth about God.
Yeah,
But then this thing usually gets in the way a little bit and
sure.
starts processing things. So what are some challenges that you've kind of walked through that you've had during this journey as you begin to realize, there are some things that you can shift, in your headspace, so to speak.
Well, I think, as we were talking about Romans 12, there's a spiritual component to that. If we back into that verse, as you
Yeah.
talk about the will of God, there's a spiritual, but also if you look at the scientific neuroplasticity design of God creating
Whoa.
our brain, it can be changed intentionally. And so Paul is speaking a spiritual statement here. However, this is my own personal theological view, but I truly believe he was speaking from a place of understanding that God actually created us to change the brain folds in our brain. Carolina Leaf speaks on this all the time in her book as she studies a Christian woman studying brain and mental health. And it's fascinating to me. And so when I think about those things, I think about, for me personally, the memories of certain trauma or certain
Mm,
things in my childhood, even leading into junior high, high school years. And I felt, that there was things inside of me, spiritually, yes, but physically, the way I responded under stress, the way I reacted in a certain situation. If I became embarrassed, what were my responses there? If I played a lot of sports growing up, my performance, my mental health on the court and off the court. And so I started to, later in life, once again, I started to look back on these things, and really mental health is a journey I found of, once you realize, like, okay, there's some things I need to, for me at least, there was a moment where I realized, I was like, okay, there's a lot here that I need to start working on. I need to work on
mm,
myself. It's like
yeah.
literally trudging back through all the memories, trauma, whatever you want to, and dragging what really God put in there in the very beginning,
Yeah.
dragging that identity back through that stuff. And that's kind of the image I get is this: as you process through it, you have to go relive it. You have to experience it, and you'll feel it physically. As I'm sitting on a counselor's couch, I'm going to feel what happened years ago. But what you realize is, after you drag yourself through those experiences, um, physically something starts to change up here. You start to think of things differently. You start to notice that under stress, I don't react with anger. I don't react, or I don't withdraw. I don't do these things that I normally did. And it's just a testimony to God and His creation, how He created His favorite creation, us, of, yes, you will experience tribulation in this life, and that will cause things to happen inside of you. These things will manifest physically. I've created your body that way to give you, to tell you that things aren't okay. Some people call it the check engine light, like on a car. But it's
Yeah.
just beautiful to me. The challenges that have come from that is, like, the redemption story of it all is, I specifically to challenges, growing up in a military household, there's great values that come with that, but not all of them are kingdom values. Integrity, hard work, those things are not bad things, but there's also some religious and really strongholds there that I had held on to in playing sports. I had great coaches, and I had coaches that really, didn't really invest in me fully, and so there was a lot of that tension there of the performance. A story that comes to mind: I was always a small kid, and I still remember this to this day. And so I played point guard, but I was kind of a defensive specialist. And I remember one time I was a junior, so I was running what do you call scout team offense? You're a basketball player, you understand the terms. But as I'm speaking to the audience here, I was practicing for the starters so that they could get better at the game. And so I'm driving into the center lane. I'm literally like 5'7", and this 6'4" guy, I mean, just takes that ball and throws it into like the seats in the gym, like just slaps it. And I remember my coach said, "Harris, you're in the land of the giants. You can't be going in there." And that statement, for some reason, of me being small and them being big, as simple as that may sound, has brought me to this place of like, am I smaller? Like in a position of like in comparison. And so all of these little, just these little things that for some reason your mind hangs on to, your body hangs on to, have been just some strongholds in my life that I've had to revisit, drag myself back to it, and then kind of break them off and come through. So it's a challenging thing, man. It really is. There's no, it's not for the weary for sure. This is a journey, but once you find freedom in knowing that God created you to overcome these things, it's quite powerful.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I love as you start approaching this topic of having a new mind, this is first, Jesus paid for it on the cross. So that's something that I think is really powerful. Science backs it up,
Sure.
which is also really fascinating. It's amazing and shocking to absolutely no one that reads the Bible and believes Jesus is who he says he is, that science continues to prove what Paul said years ago.
Sure.
I mean, you look at the Jewish law, it's really fascinating because it's the most, today science still proves that it's the most hygienic, sanitary, like all the rules from 4,000 years ago still hold up because God knows what he's talking about. So Jesus already paid for it, and then science backs it up. So for us, it's learning to walk in what's already been paid, whether that's going back through and whether you relive, or I know there's another number of different ways to walk into that freedom. But one of the things that I love is once you find that freedom, it gives you the capacity to overcome
Mm-hmm.
at a much higher level. And for you, what are some, how are you, because to me the biggest challenge in our mind is fear, and it's whether that's from a past hurt, past wound, or just like Brandy says, my hamster wheel is always turning. So, which is a wonderful blessing until it's not. So, sometimes if I'm alone, I get really stressed out with my thoughts because, I have wonderful thoughts that just run away and, do different things. So how have you addressed, fear and, as you're on this journey of having a mind that's made new? And for me, I'll tell my story
Sure.
as you jump in here in a second. But I can remember, during COVID, that was super fun time. And here in Europe and Poland, we had a lot of different, maybe more enforced restrictions than, Texas. And, Texas was, classic Texan,
Yeah.
which is good, and Poland is really great. I love living here. And one of the things that's amazing is how good they are at legally not following the law. And so, churches were allowed to meet. And so the next day there was this gym that rebranded themselves as Church of the Body. And so you
Gosh.
could pay a tithe to come and do different things. And so, restaurants, their workers could be there, but they couldn't staff people. So they would hire you to be an official taste tester. Like, it's just hilarious, like all of the things that were going on. But obviously extremely stressful, for churches specifically, because I remember we would meet on a Wednesday and on Thursday there'd be new rules. And so to couple that with working with PI where, we travel globally. So right now I think we have 3 or 4 people going from one country to another or in process as we're filming this. I think they're in the air as we speak. So all of a sudden that stopped. So everything went online. So for me, I was in the middle of all that, and I decided that I should control all of these scenarios. And eventually it led a point to me where I just like I think my brain just snapped. So it was not necessarily a panic attack. It was just kind of an anxiety
Yeah.
breakdown that because I was choosing fear and control over other things that are available to me. And so through that process, I learned a lot about myself, and I also learned how to, how do I say this? I learned the strength in relying on the Lord and learning and catching the triggers in my mind so that I don't run into fear. And sometimes I still do, and that's why you need to have people around you like your wife and friends and other people that, will speak life in those moments. But for me, one of the things I realized is, coming out of that, I was so much stronger than before. That those moments of, I don't want to say maybe it's anxiety. I don't want to oversay something that, because I know other people deal with significant anxiety and different things. So for me, one of the things that came out of that moment was I was able to mentally, I was much stronger in being able to catch those triggers. And then also it just gave me greater capacity to minister. So it was funny. This broken down moment opened the door for me to actually have a deeper level of, or I guess, I don't know how you say it, a stronger mind. And what's fun is I've gone through 3 or 4 experiences since then that there's been days I was like, I wish COVID was back compared to what I'm going through right now, because that was so much easier than this, and but I think I survived these days, or those days that were so difficult, was because I let the Lord heal me mentally from my fear of just trying to control, which was the issue. So for you, how are you working through, or addressing fears that creep up in your life? How does that, what's your process in that? Because I think that's the big one for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. Fear is really the root of. I would venture to say all, if not the majority of our minds, and the just. I think the opposite, really, for me. How I approach it is when I realize that I'm in not a good mental state, whether it's manifesting physically, like you were talking about, or I can just tell like something's off. I have to find my journey back to trust,
Hmm.
because to me, fear is the opposite of trust from my perspective. Like it's a place of, our fear is rooted in not trusting God, being who he says he is, and doing what he said he's going to do. That his promises are not going to come true, that we are not children. We can, and it ends up, and we talk a lot about this in PI, but this orphan mentality. And when you get in this cycle, like Brandy says, is like the hamster wheel, is like you begin to think thoughts, and those thoughts accumulate and they pile on top of each other. And so that's why when we say it's a journey, I mean, it truly is a journey. And so, yeah, fear is the root of a lot of what I've experienced with. And specifically for me, Josiah, it's been fear of rejection. Now, whether with my wife, my kids, if I think about, my childhood, things like that, that moment in the basketball court, like that fear of being rejected is a pain point for me. And
Or you were literally rejected.
literally, like physically rejected. And yes, that's actually funny. I've never thought about that until this moment. So that could be I'm going to use that.
That'll preach someday. That'll
That will
preach. Keep
preach.
that.
Absolutely. So yeah, fear of rejection for me has been hard. And so how I find myself back to that, obviously, is that identity piece that you talk about. The ability to find my way back to trusting him and who he says he is and what he's going to do in my life and in and through me. And so once I can find my place back to that, I typically, not always, but typically, it starts to settle. Whether that's anxiety. I mean, even right now, I think it's so funny. Like right now in my mind, I'm talking to you, I'm sharing stories, but there's a voice in the back of my head right now, because we're recording a podcast, that is telling me like, why are you on a podcast? Why are you doing this? Who's going to hear this? Are they actually going to like what you say? It's crazy. Like the amount of activity that goes on in our minds. It's a beautiful thing that God created. But if we're not careful and we don't steward it and take care of it like we should, it can really be harmful to our growth and to honestly just doing what he's called us to do. So yeah, fear is a big one, man.
Yeah, I think for all of us, I think all of us have 2 voices running around in our heads, and it's which one are we going to feed? That's going to have the greater impact in our lives, because I mean, there's been so many scenarios where I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't think I should be here. What am I doing? This is insane. And what's fascinating is if the more you walk in the kingdom, the greater risk you will be required to take, because risk is steps of faith, and like you were saying, trust in the Lord, and so that's something that we will do, uh, which means every time you take that risk, there's this moment where you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Why there's no way this could be for me. This is,
Yep.
whether that's a podcast, whether that's speaking, whether that's traveling, whether that's, being a good father, whatever it is in all of our lives, we have this kind of thought, and there's those two voices. And so for me, one of the things I'm learning is how quick can I catch myself before I run down that trail. It's a lot easier to reverse like if you're hiking, it's a lot easier. There's been a couple of times we've been hiking and we took the wrong trail, and it's a lot easier if you catch that,
Early on.
100 yards or a couple hundred meters down. That's you don't feel so bad and don't feel like an idiot. But if you're like, oh man, we wanted to be over there, and 3 hours later we are not, so we have no idea what we're going to do. So for me, that's one of the things, is trying to catch my triggers,
Yeah,
and
that's good.
and one of the things I am learning, and in the continued process of learning, is, sometimes reminding ourselves of who we are, sometimes reminding ourselves of God's promises. But what I find oftentimes is reminding myself of who He is. And that's usually a much safer bet
Mm.
than some of the promises about who I am, because,
Sure,
I'm like, I
sure.
don't I don't think I believe this right now, Jesus.
Right.
And so I know what you said, but I have my doubts at this specific moment. But I'm always confident in who He is. And as that happens, there's a shift that begins to happen within my mind mentally, of just really calming down the hamster wheel of chaos, that sometimes some of us can spin out of. So do you have any specific so one of the things that I'm trying to think how to ask this question appropriately for everyone is, one of the things I'm good at is, once I have victory in, especially with the way I think, and then inevitably there will be a new challenge in that same area. And one of the things I love about the Lord is, some of our points of greatest frustration within our own lives are usually some of the greatest places we can show victory to other people, and and minister out
Right.
of that. Like, one of the things I love talking about is finances. I have huge faith for finances, for other people, for ministry and things. Sometimes personally, I'm like, oh, are you sure you want to bless me, God? Which, so it's,
Yeah.
which is funny, because I have so many amazing stories personally, and then also within other people's ministries. And so, but I realize that this is a point that I always have to battle mentally. But every time I have a victory, I realize somehow that releases other people. So one of the things I have a challenge with, and maybe you can help me with, is I have a victory and then I just have a bad day. And my prayer is I have less and less bad days. So how do you recover from that? Because, it's kind of like, ah, I had this and now I feel like I've lost it, and you can kind of spiral. It's kind of like falling off a cliff, and
Sure.
snowball effect. So,
Yeah.
so what are some things that you've done to help work through that?
Um, Man, it's so true. I think the simple tool for me has been the power of remembrance. When Jesus is sitting at the
Mm,
table with the disciples, he says this word, and it's like it's easy to just skim over it, but he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." I mean, I grew up Catholic, so that was like a prayer that we prayed in every mass, right? But like, do
yeah,
this in
yeah.
remembrance of me. And today, as I look back, I'm like, man, that is a powerful statement. Do this in remembrance of me, meaning like you're going to need to remember. This isn't, it's
Mm,
not just about bread
that's
and
good.
wine here. And so for me, when I spiral, or we'll use the word relapse for the sake of the conversation, I think it's remembering how far I've come,
Mm,
and that he has brought me through these things. And just because one bad day happens doesn't necessarily mean I am back to square one. I may be right where I was yesterday, but I am much better than I was. And so that's been so pivotal for me. And then just like, leaning on people that I love and care for, my wife, like close friends saying like, they're like, man, I'm like, hey, I need you to speak life into me. Like, tell me, my wife's saying like, man, you're not the same guy I married, and those types of statements
In a good way, right?
in a very good way. At least I think so. But they carry weight. They carry weight
Yeah.
in our minds. The words that are spoken over you. Many have heard this, but there was a Japanese scientist who did a experiment on water, and he spoke to water. He played loud music around water. He played nice music around. He did these two contrasting experiments, and then whenever he looked at them under a microscope, the words that were spoken harshly over these water molecules that were frozen, the snowflake like molecules were distorted, they were deformed. And then the other ones were beautiful. And I think it's something to say about like, okay, first of all, our physical makeup, as we talk about science, is 60 to 70% water. So to say that so remembering who God is and what he has done for you, the journey how much you've grown personally, because it is a personal journey. You said it earlier. It's like, I can speak all about finances, but when it becomes my own journey, then it gets hard. Well, that's the journey of the power of the transformed mind. It's a personal journey. And so
Yeah.
once that happens, you reflect back, okay, I'm not who I once was. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not who I once was. And then you start to have those people encourage you, or even speaking words over yourself and declaring those words over yourself. It sounds super corny, super hyper spiritual, but it's actually extremely powerful, and it's actually scientific. You can actually change your physical makeup by speaking encouraging things over you. So again, God in his creation really gave us tools and the power to do so.
Yeah, and I think it's important engaging all of your senses in that process is really important. Even just speaking it, or for me, a lot of times I'll listen to worship music
Yep.
as well, which I don't listen. I'm not one of those people that some people, like my sister, who walks around worship all the whatever. So that's not normally how I am. But if I'm at a low point, I need to hear some promises and just spend some time worshiping the Lord, just to reposition my brain where it's much more appropriate. And I like what you said about everything. There's always a journey in the process, and you're not where you were, but you're not where. What do you say? You're not where you were, but you're much further along,
I'm
or
not who I
something you
want to
want
be,
to
but I'm
say.
not where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But one of the great things, and what I love, and sometimes people get frustrated, is there's really no end to the journey, which means
Right.
there's always greater victory.
Yep.
There's always greater steps of faith, which requires greater battles with different types of fear and
Opportunity.
things,
Yeah.
which, some people can sit there and say, oh man, but for me, it's like, what an adventure that we have, because there's so much more still available. And, sometimes when you look back and you realize I'm not the same person I was, in a good way, because God is transforming me in this process. But at the same time, it's like, man, look where I get to go. This is going to be 2028 Josiah is going to be awesome compared to 2024 Josiah,
Yep.
and so that's, one of those things that I love about the Lord, is that he's never like, okay, Ryan, yeah, that's about all you've reached 100% of what you can do. So that's,
That's so
good
true.
luck for the next 15 years or whatever, we have in our mind.
I love that you
But
talk about victory too, Josiah, because I think one thing we don't do well on this journey is celebrate the revelation or celebrate those victories. Like when
mm,
God does something in us and we don't stop and celebrate it with him, with others. It's almost, I don't want to make it sound too like milestone-y, but it really is. I mean, we got to recognize that there's things that God is doing in us, and when we accomplish, when we overcome those things, when we do things that we've never done before in a good way, um, we don't celebrate well. We don't celebrate ourselves well, because again, it feels weird almost to do that, but to really celebrate those revelations, those victories that you're talking about, I think is an important piece to it too. It's something that I haven't done well that I'm trying to practice in this season of my life. So
yeah, I think that's really important. And for me, one of the things, we have the promise that we can have the mind of God.
yep,
Like that's the promise, and that's the end goal. So we can think like him. Our thoughts can be processed like he processed. That's the promise that we have available to us.
That's right.
So that's amazing, and what a journey we get, And so sometimes I feel especially when you start talking to specific groups in the mental health space, a lot of it really focuses on kind of taking you out of stuff, which is a part of that process. But there's also this whole other side in the kingdom where you're actually being put into this new experience, and that is discovering how God thinks about whether that's you, whether that's your family, whether that's your purpose in life, whether that's your mission on this earth to make him glorified, whatever it may be. And so for me, that's something that I really personally enjoy, is that it wasn't like, oh, okay, Ryan, we're going to fix your anxiety and then we're done. But it's like, actually, but actually now you're going to get to experience and walk through what this looks like from my perspective, which is really amazing. And
Right.
to me, that's something that's really fun.
Absolutely.
So, any other closing comments on the process of transforming our mind that you have?
Um, yeah, it's not easy, but it's worth it. I think that's my thing, is just if we are to become more like him, this is a pivotal part of the journey. I love what you said earlier, Josiah, about learning how to train yourself to take thoughts captive, as Paul would talk about. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
reason these things were spoken. I mean, it's truly fascinating. Paul talks a lot about the mind, and so I would say it's probably pretty important for us to pay attention to and to really unpack what it means to renew the mind. We talk about this in our teaching, but that word metamorpho is true transformation. Like it's changing. It's like the metamorphosis word that we see from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And a lot of times I talk about this is I think about like what it would mean to be a caterpillar one day, rummaging on the ground, scurrying around, and then take a nap, and then you wake up and you're flying above the world. And those are two different perspectives, right? And so I think that word is intentionally used as we look at like the root words of it, is that metamorphosis is God's desire for our lives. That metamorphosis is for us to truly, over time, over and over again, even daily, as Paul says, to go through that metamorphosis process, to renew our minds. Because every day when our feet hit the floor, Josiah, we have a choice. We can choose the lie, or we can choose truth. There's no middle ground. And that's really what it comes down to, is taking the discipline to take those thoughts captive, choose the metamorphosis process of, okay, I'm establishing this day, I'm establishing this time, even in the midst of a terrible situation, on truth, and remembering that that's how he designed us and created us to be, and we have the ability to do so. So it's truly fascinating to me, and it's a part of the process of becoming like him.
Yeah, for me, it is an exciting journey, although it's extremely challenging at times, but it opens up the opportunity that we didn't even really talk about today for you to become more useful in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier for, you mentioned earlier, orphan and son, which we talk about, whether it's a slave mentality, orphan mentality, or versus son. And, one of the things that we discuss all the time, that the father not only teaches the son what to do, but he teaches the son how to think.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that he, which is the promise of a new mind. And the reason he does that is because he has given us an inheritance, and he wants to give more to us. But he's only going to do that because he's a good father as our mind is transformed. And so for me, I always think, this may be hell or difficult situation I'm going through mentally and whatever thing, I usually have moments where I'm super low, but then I rejoice in the process, realizing that I'm being prepared for greater use in the kingdom. And that's something that, beyond the peace, beyond anything else, that's something that for me brings great joy to my life. So I just want to encourage all of us, let's go on this journey together.
Yeah.
It is a challenge, but there's lots of victory. Be in a community. So as Brian said, it's really important. I have 3 or 4 people in my life that are really important in speaking life to me and reminding me of who I am. So just want to encourage everyone to be in that as well, because this journey is a lot more fun whenever you're with someone else. Don't take yourself too seriously. It's another great thing. And then let's just become useful sons in the kingdom, because that's what it's all about. So Until next time, everyone, thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to what we have in store in the future.